The First Circuit selected Julian Tiepolo, the middle-aged presenter Atreus, to become the new Primus. Tiepolo was a calm and reserved individual who, like his predecessors, possessed strong organizational and administrative skills. His appointment was a result of a settlement between the conservative and liberal factions within the First Circuit. When he became the new leader of the order, he faced two significant issues. One was the ongoing attempts of Rom to infiltrate Wolf's Dragoons and to uncover their origins. The other, which was more pressing, was the ongoing devaluation of the sea bill compared to the house currencies, particularly those of House Marik. To address the situation, Primus Tiepolo introduced some fiscal reforms that included a 20% rate increase. However, these measures were only a temporary solution. It is noteworthy that the previous leader, Primus Rosenstein, had attempted to pass a similar bill, but due to his worsening relationship with the First Circuit, it was not approved. In 3009, the Dragoons disappeared, and upon their return, they had new members and resources. The following year, presenter Rom, Christopher, proposed a plan for a civil war within the Free Worlds League. Duke Anton Marik, brother of Captain General Janos Marik, would launch a rebellion against his brother for the control of the FWL. This rebellion would require support from Maximilian Liao, who would send troops to aid Anton Marik. Prior to Anton Marik's announcement of his rebellion, negotiations had already taken place between him and Maximilian. This included an arrangement for Liao's daughter, Candace, to marry Anton Marik in the future. Additionally, the Capel Confederation agreed to provide military training and intelligence to support Marik's cause. Liao intended to use this support to gain influence on the FWL and to later rule it through his daughter. The objective of the entire plan was straightforward: to cause a full-scale civil war and weaken House Marik's economy. The calculated losses would also force the Dragoons to make another supply run, which would be traced by ComStar's force to uncover the source of the equipment. Furthermore, if Anton's rebellion succeeded, ComStar would gain a strong position within the Free Worlds League for further expansion. However, it was not without danger. If ComStar was ever linked to instigating a civil war, all the great houses would launch intelligence operations against Rom. They might even attempt to take over ComStar's communications network. Additionally, if the plan failed to weaken Wolf's Dragoons, they might view ComStar as a potential threat, which could put Terra itself in danger. It is unclear if a plan was created or just supported by the Primus. But in 3014, ComStar started to encourage Anton Marik's ambitions to rule. Presenter Rom, Christopher, served as a personal liaison between Anton Marik and Maximilian Liao in a meeting at Kishmir Ecology on Terra. He carefully managed the negotiations to include military support from Wolf's Dragoons. Marik returned to the Free Worlds League with Jamie Wolf, and presenter Christopher had all his paces in play of a grand game he aimed to play. Later that year, Anton Marik announced himself as the true Captain General of the Free Worlds League and launched a full-scale rebellion against his brother. In 3015, presenter Rom, Christopher, persuaded Anton Marik to divide the Wolf's Dragoons into several units and place them under the control of his own officers. This action violated the original contract and resulted in aggressive altercation between Anton Marik and Jamie Wolf. Christopher used this to put more stress on the Dragoons. He manipulated Anton's emotions by fueling his anger towards the Wolf's disobedience and encouraged him to take the Dragoons' families hostage once Jamie Wolf and most of his troops had left New Dallas, as a means to secure the Wolves' cooperation. Duke Anton Marik then captured Joshua Wolf, all the Dragoon staff, and their families stationed on New Dallas. He sent a message to Jamie Wolf with an ultimatum: either place his troops under the command of Marik's officers, or the hostages would be killed. However, immediately after the hostages were taken, they were executed, and the reason behind this is still unknown. Both Anton Marik and Presenter Rom Christopher did not anticipate the hunger for revenge the Dragoons would feel after this betrayal. They turned around and launched an attack on Anton Marik's palace on New Dallas. While Duke Marik died in the attack, Presenter Christopher managed to escape. Upon his return to Terra, Primus Tiepolo placed him under house arrest. The First Circuit could not forgive Rom's failure to learn the Dragoons' source of supply, but the plan was not a complete failure. The value of Marik's house currency plummeted as a result of the Civil War, improving ComStar's financial situation in the process. The Dragoons decided to delay the next supply run until 3019. However, ComStar still could not figure out where the Dragoons were getting their supplies from, or to follow their trail. In 3015, Hans Davian, who had recently become the Prince of the Federated Suns, announced plans to build the new Avalon Institute of Science, NAIS. The university was designed specifically to recover the lost technology of the Star League. Soon after, Hal Steiner and Kurita also established their own research facilities, but the NAIS was considered superior to the others. From 3016 to 3025, Rom made several attempts to infiltrate it, but all of them failed. The Primus himself was convinced that the will of Blake would ultimately triumph. If they could escalate the war, he believed that House Davian would be forced to redirect funding towards war preparations, which would ultimately lead to the failure of the NAIS. ComStar had always viewed alliances between the great houses as against the will of Blake. But Primus Tiepolo began to think of a way how to use such alliances for the benefit of ComStar. Maybe it would become possible to pit these coalitions against each other. An opportunity to test these assumptions appeared in 3020. ComStar transmitted a message from Katrina Steiner calling for peace among the great houses of the Inner Sphere. Only Hans Davian of the Federated Suns responded, and Primus Tiepolo saw an opportunity to use it as his advantage. Not only did he accept the peace offer, Prince Davian even proposed an alliance between the Federated Suns and the Lion Commonwealth to create one great realm, the Federated Commonwealth. And to cement the alliance, he suggested marrying Melissa Steiner, the Archon's daughter. While Primus Tiepolo was thrilled with this development, the First Circuit was shocked by the idea of having to handle such a powerful alliance. The Primus waved off their arguments only a week before the treaty signing ceremony. He summed up his seasoning. "We have a choice. Let the unification take place without our involvement, or act as a guiding force behind it. I choose the second option because it gives ComStar means of control, and the blessed Blake himself realized the value of such control." To address their concerns, Tiepolo allowed Rom to leak information of the alliance treaty to the intelligence agencies of the other houses. The resulting rumors would lead to the formation of a counter-alliance among the remaining house leaders to defend themselves against the new Federated Commonwealth. In 3022, Subhash Indraha, head of the Draconis Combine's ISF, invited Janus Marik to discuss a mutual defense treaty. When Marik arrived at the Terran Alps retreat of Elmau, he discovered that Takeshi Kurita had also invited Maximilian Liao. Janus was angry with Kurita for attempting to ally him with House Liao, who had just helped Marik's brother to launch a civil war against him. But eventually, Kurita convinced Marik that the future threat of a federated Commonwealth was more important than justice for past transgressions. The resulting treaty, called the Concord of Carpathian, called for an end to all hostilities between the houses Kurita, Marik, and Liao, and for mutual support in training and intelligence. Primus Tiepolo was pleased with the results, having turned the inner sphere into two armed camps. Satisfied for the moment that both unified factions were already planning to continue the hostilities against their enemies. Sometime later, ComStar's agent learned that the Grey Death Legion's landhold on Helm was located above a cache of Star League equipment, materiel, and possibly a Star League library. Such a dangerous storage of technology and knowledge could not be allowed to exist outside the Order. Action was required. ComStar informed House Marik of a suspected stockpile and secured their cooperation to recover it. However, they believed that the Great Death Legion would not allow access to the landhold, and feared they could discover the cache and make use of its findings. To address this, ComStar planned to frame the Great Death Legion for a minor civilian incident that would result in their destruction, allowing ComStar to infiltrate the Three Worlds League forces and then to locate and recover or destroy the stockpile. Presenter Emilio Rajan was put in charge of a division of ComStar guards and militia on standby to execute the plan. However, he escalated the situation by attempting to start another civil war and to destabilize the region even further by contracting rebels inside the Three Worlds League. He also orchestrated the massacre of more than 12 million inhabitants of Series 5, using Grey Death Legion's colors and markings on battle mechs and ships. He did this by destroying the domes, ancient wonders of technology dating back to the Golden Age of Star League. They protected the civilians of Series 5 from the deadly atmosphere of their world. A word of the massacre did not reach Primus Tiepolo until Rajan's plan was well underway. When the First Circuit learned of Presenter Rajan's betrayal, the scale of murder, and the loss of irreplaceable technology, they ordered him excommunicated from ComStar and exterminated by ROM. But ROM should never carry out their order. Colonel Grayson Carlyle of the Grey Death Legion not only was able to defeat the FWL forces in all engagements, he also discovered the true value of the Star League Library Core and managed to slay the renegade presenter Rajan. To make things truly devastating, the Grey Death Legion made multiple copies of the memory core and sent them to almost all parties in the inner sphere. ROM was able to intercept and destroy multiple of them, but plenty made it through. Most damning one copy that reached the NAIS and the Federated Suns. The bungled affair with the Grey Death Legion and the Star League Library Core were more blemishes on the record of Primus Julian Tiepolo. Combined with his failure regarding the Dragoons, these scandals would have destroyed his career, were it not for the outbreak of the Fourth Succession War. The start of the Fourth Succession War was announced in the midst of a wedding reception for Hans Davian and Melissa Steiner in August 3028. ComStar hosted the ceremony. Besides that, two further events occurred that undermined the trust in the capabilities of ROM. First, Colonel Jamie Wolf arrived at the reception, bearing the sword of the late Minobu Tetsuhara, which he delivered to Takashi Kurita, along with a dressing down for the waist of a valuable soldier. An affront against Rom, because all kinds of weapons had strictly been forbidden during the celebration. Wolf's ability to smuggle a sword past the security was anything but a small incident. Second, the House Liao entourage was involved in an assassination attempt against Quintus Allard, the head of House Davian's MIIO. 2 Rom security details were killed during the incident. The perpetrators remained unknown. The declaration of war itself is widely known history. Raising his glass in a toast before all the leaders of the inner sphere at his wedding reception, Hans Davian declared war on House Liao and announced that his forces were already striking at the heart of the Confederation. The Lyrian Commonwealth had also opened up a full-scale invasion of the Draconis Combine. The Fourth Succession War had begun, catching ComStar completely unprepared. The 2-year-long war was quite short but extremely bloody. The centuries-lasting Third Succession War had not resulted in meaningful changes of the border and never endangered the established social and political order. The repercussions of the Fourth should shape the sphere for the rest of the 31st and even much of the 32nd century. In November 3028, the First Circuit of ComStar held a meeting to discuss the possibility of one side achieving total victory in an ongoing war. To prevent such an outcome, Presenter Waterley proposed that ComStar should impose a full communications interdiction on the Federated Suns. In May of the following year, House Davian forces attacked Sarna. To provide a pretext for an interdiction against the Federated Suns, Rom developed a plan to frame House Davian and Federated Suns for an attack on the HPG station of that world. To create proof, a small group of ComStar guards and militia was disguised as the 5th Certus Fusiliers and transported to the surface of Sarna. Using captured inventory sheets, their mechs were painted to look exactly like those of the Fusiliers. The troops were told that the personnel of the HPG station had mutinied against ComStar and were aiding House Davian. The ComStar guards were then sent to attack the HPG while being filmed by a ROM operative. This allowed ComStar to gather evidence against House Davian and the Federated Suns, which was immediately placed under interdiction starting June 1st, 3029. The ComStar guards were smuggled off-world, and House Davian was left trying to piece together what had happened. To avert their investigation, ROM operatives planted evidence implicating House Dios Maskurovka in the attack. However, there is another version of this incident. Some suggest that the entire battle was staged on Terra and that no real attack actually occurred. The likelihood of this version of event is a matter of personal judgment. The primary opponent of Primus Tiepolo was not a House Lord, a secret agent, or Jamie Wolf, or the Great Death Legion. Rather, it was an individual in ComStar with great ambition, unyielding determination, and savage ruthlessness, who coveted the position of Primus for herself. Presenter Dieron, Yundo Waterley. Despite the interdiction of the Federated Suns, slowing the Davian war machine, it failed to hold its advance entirely. With Tikhonov firmly under control of the Federated Suns, House Liao faced near annihilation. In August of 3029, Presenter Waterley brought forth shocking evidence to the First Circuit. A copy of a Star League memory core recovered by the Great Death Legion had made its way to the NAIS. Should this information fall into the hands of the great minds gathered there, ComStar would face an unparalleled threat to its technology superiority. Waterley used this revelation to call for an expulsion of Primus Tiepolo, who suffered a heart attack amidst the ensuing debate and was rushed to the Hilton Head Medical Center. 2 days later, he suffered an additional massive stroke and was kept on life support after that. In the midst of this crisis, the First Circuit agreed to Waterloo's proposal to attack the NAIS and destroy or capture the memory core. Together with the Presenter ROM, a battalion-sized strike force was assembled, made to resemble an elite force of the House Liao Death Commandos. All troops volunteered, fully aware that the mission was a one-way attack and under no circumstances were to be taken prisoner. The mech warriors were given a quick-acting poison with the Presenter ROM to use if they were captured. Success was the only acceptable outcome. On September 10th, 3029, the ComStar Death Commandos attacked the new Avalon Institute of Science. Prince Davian himself led the counterattack in his Battlemaster, with NIAS security supporting him. The battle on the campus lasted over 2 full hours, and when it was over, the ComStar force had been destroyed to the last battle mech. The memory core remained intact and in the hands of the Federated Suns scientists. The clandestine mission was a dismal failure. Despite this setback, the First Circuit did not blame Presenter Waterloo. Primus Tiepolo had failed for so long to take any action against the Federated Commonwealth that Waterloo's bold move was thus excusable. No one on the First Circuit doubted her personal power or devotion to the word of Blake, and her star was on the rise. In November, Primus Tiepolo passed away in his hospital bed. The First Circuit appointed Mjolnir Waterloo as the 13th Primus of the Blessed Order.